Bloodlust of the mind. Dane was at the bar 15 hours before the bodies were found. He was in the city of Philadelphia, having fun, making baits, and not thinking of tomorrow. When 12 a.m. came, and he lost another bet of $50, he went walking home to his apartment. This was a good 30-minute walk, and there was usually nobody around there. It was a very dark night as Dane walked and blew hot steam from his mouth to counter the cold. He started to think of dark things that he could do. 12:40 a.m., 14 hours before the bodies were found. As he went in to think of those stupid baits that he made at the bar, he heard a noise in the kitchen. He grabbed a bat from his room and slowly went into the kitchen. He then swung and hit something. He went to turn on the light, and he looked at his dog on the floor and fell down onto the floor crying. He held the dog in his arms, but realized something. The dog was already dead before he hit it. Before he could get up, someone put an alcohol-covered towel over his mouth and made him pass out. It was 3 a.m., 11 hours before the bodies were found. Dane woke up chained and beaten. He could hear someone talking from somewhere and yelled, "What do you want from me?" He then saw 5 people show up with weapons. They then said, "We want our money back." Dane then remembered that at the bar he made a bet with these guys from the Mafia for $1,000. But after they left, he made more baits and lost all the money. He tried to explain this to them, but it was to no avail as they began beating him with a rusty pipe. No matter how hard he screamed, nobody could hear him. They then left him alone for a period of time to think about his actions. What they didn't know was he actually got the key from one of their pockets while they were beating him. He then unchained himself, and as he began to leave, his dark thoughts began to come back, as this was the perfect moment to unleash them and get revenge on those who beat him up. It was 5 a.m., 9 hours before the bodies were found. Dane was in an abandoned train station. Dane then picked up a crowbar on the floor and began to walk back to where the people were. He hid around the corner until they went to where he was supposed to be. They began to yell at each other when they realized he wasn't there and that the key was not in their pocket. As they scattered around looking for him, they split up into different groups. There was one person who went in alone. Dane went after that one. As the person looked around the corner, trying to find Dane, he was getting suspicious and kept on looking behind him, but nothing could save him from what happened next. As he looked around the corner, the last thing he saw was the crowbar going into his face repetitively. Dane's first victim was down and he wanted more. He looted the guy and now had a machete. It was 6 a.m., 8 hours before the bodies were found. He went after a group of 2, and these guys had guns. He took one out with no problem. He did not make the slightest of noise as he slit his throat and covered his mouth while dragging him into the darkness and making sure that would be the last thing he ever saw. He even waits for an hour and paranoia starts to grow on the unexpected victim. He had his gun out and was shouting for his partner to come back. He then walked into a container yard, still looking for Dane. As he turns a corner, Dane jumps from one of the containers with his machete and cuts his head in half. He screams for 1 second, then silence. 2 more to go, he says. The remaining men know what happened to the others and are setting up a trap for Dane. As he walked into the center of the train station, a bear trap went off. going into his foot in agonizing pain. The two pop up from the shadows with metal bats. Right before they begin to pound him with the metal bats, he pulls out a pistol and shoots their legs. He also hits one of them in the arm. He then gets out of the bear trap. He limps on a leg using one of their bats as a cane. He then uses the chains that he was in to tie them up, hanging them by their waist on the ceiling together. He then leaves them there, knowing that they will have no food and water, and they will hang there and starve to death. To make sure that nobody finds them, he blows up the entrance with a tank of gasoline. It was 12 p.m., 2 hours before the bodies were found. He returned to his apartment and buried his dog. It is now 1 p.m., 1 hour before the bodies were found. Dane sits on his couch remembering what he did. He knows he can't live with himself after what he did for the rest of his life, so he makes it quick and picks up the pistol. The bodies were found.